Hello, U.S. history students. Welcome in an e-learning lesson for lesson 3.4 in U.S. history, in which the United States expands. We are moving west, and along the way, unwittingly, we are sowing more seeds that are going to lead us into the Civil War. Okay, so that's our broad story about expansion, this idea of manifest destiny that's propelling all of it. And what does this have to do with the central event in our country's story? So let's jump in. How do we expand from sea to shining sea, right? So, I mean, we've learned the story. If we go over here, we learned the story of the American Revolution and how that ended up with a treaty where we get all the land west of the Mississippi. Then we get the Louisiana Purchase. How about that? We're going to talk about this chunk of territory here in Texas and all these great states in the Southwest, all the way to California. What's the story there? And like I said before, what does that have to do with the Civil War? Right, so this is a story that at the time feels like a great success. Certainly, these places are essential, indispensable parts of the United States today. Texas and California. I mean, two very distinct, different sort of brands or subgenres of America, but they're part of us and a part of our story. How did they get to be part of the United States? And again, how does that sort of contribute to this central dysfunction that has to do with slavery? So this process of expanding from the Atlantic to the Pacific is extraordinary. Like I told you in class, at the start of the 19th century, Ohio was the West. By the middle of the 19th century, California and Oregon are becoming states. And so, this is happening at an explosive rate that's really unprecedented in history. This kind of bottom-up expansion, across a continent like this. In a weird way, Americans had always believed that this was going to happen. Going way, way, way back to the earliest colonial days, people held it as almost an article of faith of if we establish something here, we can establish it and it can grow across this continent. And certainly once there is a thing called the United States, there just is this belief that it was a quasi-religious belief that basically God had set the table for us to just sort of expand and spread our way of life. Manifest destiny is not like it's not like someone said, hey, I have this idea, let's call it manifest destiny, and I wonder what would happen if we spread across the North American continent. No, manifest destiny is like the name that was given to the belief and to the sort of attitude that was there from the beginning. Americans had always kind of held that. Manifest destiny is coined by a newspaper writer, and people go, yeah, that's it. Manifest, it's obvious, it's plain. This is what God has for us, and it is our destiny. This is what is set out for us. Images like the image you see here, where the man is saying literally to his children, this is our inheritance. This will be ours. Now, this is not going to happen smoothly or easily. It's certainly a great deal of heroic sacrifice is made by pioneers and settlers, but it's also going to lead to several wars, and it's going to make things toxic in certain ways regarding the slavery question. By the way, I took these pictures at a pizza ranch, of all things. So maybe if pizza ranch is a good analogy of we kind of ate so much and it made us sick for a while, there's a bit of manifest destiny to that. So manifest destiny is alive and well at the New Prague Pizza Ranch, where the Welly family dines from time to time. This image here, American progress, where it shows this sort of providential angel with the book of the law and a telegraph wire, sort of spreading from right to left, or from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from east to west, as it were. And behind her are stagecoaches and railroads and farmers, and she is sweeping out of the way Native Americans and buffalo and other pointless things like this, right? And so I'm saying this with some irony, but this is the idea, all right? This is what was believed as kind of the providential sweep or purpose for American life in many ways. This is a theme in the first half of our story that we are meant to spread because what we have is good. The American life is good, and let's just say it, it's better than what Native Americans are going to offer the world. It's better than what, Spanish colonial territories or Mexico could offer the world. What we have is better, therefore we should expand. And you know what? If you need to crack a couple eggs in order to make an omelet, let's get into the business of making omelets, right? That's a manifest destiny. That's westward expansion. So let's talk about a couple examples of that in progress. Texas. Look, Texas is great. Texas is a special part of the United States today. In, let's say, 1820, let's pick a period of time, all right, early in the 19th century. In 1820, when people are looking to the west and eyeing up, well, what would be places that are ready to go? What are places that are ready for development? What are places that could be sort of brought into the American economic system right now? In particular, from a southern point of view, where could we grow cotton? Right, that's a good question. A first place you look is Texas, specifically East Texas, right? The portion of Texas tucked in there by Arkansas, Louisiana, that sort of area. From people's perspective, from Americans' perspective, they said that's good farmland right there. There's not many people living there, right? There's a few thousand Tejanos, which is like, Hispanic settlers there who are like really remote, far away from the Mexican governments located down in Mexico City. I mean, that's far, far away, and so the Tejanos are more or less on their own. I mean, there's some Comanche Indians who are not friendly with the settlers, but there's a relatively small number of them. And so, I mean, what's the problem here? Let's go. Well, the only problem is Texas is a part of Mexico. So that's a little problem. But, it's sort of like all these, imagine a figurative border between the United States and Mexico in those days, and all these Americans sort of lining up at the border, looking into Mexico's territory at this region of Texas saying, man, that'd be some good farming right there. Ooh, that'd be some good cotton growing area. And Mexico's government is watching that dynamic saying, I don't like this, right? This is going to be a problem. And so hoping to, kill a few birds with one stone, Mexico says, all right, American settlers, how about this? Why don't you guys, we will allow you to come into Texas if you become Mexican citizens. Now, becoming a Mexican citizen means a couple things. Becoming a Mexican citizen means you're no longer an American citizen. It means you have to be Catholic. So renounce any Protestant leanings or beliefs you might have had and become Catholic. Also, we don't have slavery in Mexico, so you can't bring your slaves with you. All right? You agree to those three, and come on in. You can help develop Texas and maybe be a little buffer with some of these Comanche Indians that are a problem, Mexico's thinking, right? So this is like a gamble Mexico takes, thinking maybe we can go with this energy instead of fighting against it. And I would say the Americans who came in, they became Mexican citizens, but they kept practicing Protestantism privately, and they also brought their slaves with them. So the American settlers did not do a great job of holding up their end of the bargain. But there's basically Texas is now tens of thousands of Americans are moving in, developing it, settling it, doing all this stuff. They feel like, we are sort of establishing economic roots and doing all the things here that need to happen, and they're turning it into they're growing cotton, right, and they're farming in this area. They feel like we're putting in all the sweat equity, though. They don't feel like they're getting much backup or support or help from the Mexican government. Give it 10 years, a bunch of conflict emerges between the Texas settlers, the Texans, and the Mexico's government, and there is a war for Texas independence. In the end, this Texas Revolution happens. There's a whole battle at the Alamo and a bunch of other famous stories in there. And the Texans win, and the Texans win their independence from Mexico. And so it's like, hey, look at this. Now, between the United States and Mexico is this new little independent republic, this independent country of Texas. And the first thing that Texas does is it says, hey, United States of America, we have filled out our paperwork. We would love to become a state in the United States of America. And this gets complicated, all right? So, many of us might say, what's the holdup? Like, let's go. Texas in the United States, let's go. Well, the holdup is a couple things. First of all, Texas and Mexico, the ending of that revolution got a little sloppy. It got a little messy. If we take a look at this map, this region in yellow here of East Texas is certainly that was recognized by Texas and Mexico as part of this newly independent Republic of Texas. The Texans got the Mexican dictator at the time, a guy named General Santa Anna, to sign off on also giving them all of this territory here that's called this disputed territory, right? This enormous chunk of land that includes part of today's, Colorado and New Mexico and Oklahoma, all this extra land, right? They got Santa Anna to agree to give them all that. The rest of Mexico's government got rid of Santa Anna and said, hold on, all that disputed territory is not part of Texas. And so there's a thing where like Texas and Mexico don't agree on what their border is. Americans, especially Americans in Congress, say, so Texas wants into the United States, but they have this they've got this thing where they don't agree with Mexico on their border. And so if we add Texas to the United States, we are inheriting a border dispute, which means we're inheriting a likely war. And we don't want to inherit a likely war. That is a headache. And so Texas has to figure out their border first. Northerners are also like, this is going to add another slave state to the United States. And we don't want to add another slave state to the United States because that means that we're back to the Missouri Compromise thing. Then there's going to be an imbalance in the Senate with more slave states than free states. And so there's, for these two reasons, for the fact of Texas and Mexico don't agree on their border, and the fact that Texas is a slave state and Northerners are like, I don't really want to do that. Texas is basically in the waiting room, right? They're hanging around for 9 years. 9 years spent as an independent country, an independent republic, doing their own thing. There's a bunch of Texans who start to say, I don't know, maybe we just stay an independent country. Maybe that would be an okay thing, right? And so there's some people in Texas who are thinking of kind of rescinding that request. And that's kind of upping the pressure in the United States and in the United States Congress, what do we do with this, right? We got to either move on this or not. What do we do with Texas? What do we do with Texas? And this will basically get settled in a presidential campaign, all right? The 1844 presidential campaign is a campaign between two candidates, James K. Polk, the Democrat from Tennessee, and Henry Clay, our old friend, the colossus of Congress, right? The great compromiser, the man who's been around Washington for 30 plus years at this point, so he knows the deal. These two guys, and the question of Texas is the central question of this campaign. And in this, let's just look at a couple excerpts from what they had to say on this, right? So James K. Polk says, none can fail to see the danger to our safety and our future peace if Texas remains an independent state or becomes an ally or dependency of some foreign nation. So Polk says, you got to bring in Texas. We got to make Texas part of the United States because it's dangerous if we don't. He says, is there one among our citizens who would not prefer perpetual peace with Texas to occasional wars which so often occur between bordering independent nations? Look, adding Texas to the list of countries in North America complicates things, right? And we're going to end up in disputes. Texas already has a border dispute with Mexico. We may well get pulled into that. Let's bring in Texas, right? And let's have perpetual peace with Texas, and let's add Texas to our energy, so to speak. Now, Henry Clay says, guys, this is complicated, all right? I oppose the annexation of Texas, he says, on the ground of which the influence which it would exert in the balance of political power between the two great sections of the Union, the balance between free and slave states. It would menace the existence of the Union. I think it far more wise and important to compose and harmonize the present Union as it now exists than to introduce a new element of discord and distraction into it. He's saying, guys, we have problems enough as it is. We have problems enough on our own. We have enough escalating tension between North and South right now. Adding Texas into the mix is going to add a whole lot of distraction and discord and disharmony. And I'm just telling you, I work with these people. I know how this works in Congress. This is going to be ugly. So let's just note, each of them is saying basically, for reasons of peace, we must add Texas. Or for reasons of peace, we must not add Texas. It's a complicated one. And in the end, the country votes. It's fairly close on a popular vote terms. But Polk, the Democrat, the sort of relatively unknown Democrat, on this platform of Texas go, wins. He wins the electoral vote. And so at that point, the country says, let's go. Let's add Texas. Let's make this happen. Now, Polk is, when James K. Polk, goes to bed at night and closes his eyes, he prays to the God of manifest destiny. Now, he was a devout Christian. I want to be clear. I don't want to disparage his faith, but I'll just say no one believed more wholeheartedly that it was good for the United States to expand than James K. Polk. And Polk has this sort of baldly expansionist policy. And he just says, I'm going to do what it takes for the United States of America to expand from sea to shining sea. And he's extremely effective in that goal. He's one of the most effective, pound for pound, one of the most effective presidents in American history, because he's not president for long. He's only president for 4 years. He actually promises, I'll just serve one term. I bet you I can get to the United States all the way to the Pacific Ocean in one term. And what do you know? He does it. Now, he might be more famous if he was more interesting. Honestly, he is just sort of like a rigid, black and white thinking, extremely hardworking man who keeps a journal or a diary at night in which he records all the hard work he did and all the other people he noticed who weren't working as hard as he was. And so Polk is a funny dude. He does have a mullet, so we will give him some credit for this. So anyway, let's jump in. Let's talk about what James K. Polk does as president. So we add Texas, all right? Texas is a part of the United States, so we add Texas to this. And the first thing James K. Polk does as president, I mean, maybe not the first. I'm sure he organizes his desk table first. But one of the first things he does as president is he says, gang, I'm going to order the United States Army into this disputed territory. And why am I going to order the United States Army to sort of march around in this disputed territory? Let's just call a spade a spade. I'm going to do that because that's going to provoke Mexico to respond. And then Mexico is going to respond. Someone's going to do something stupid. Someone's going to shoot at somebody. And then we're going to go, and then we're going to end up in a war with Mexico, which we can win, and we can acquire even more territory. And of course, we can resolve this disputed territory thing. So we are going to provoke a war. Yes, we're going to provoke a war, but a war that's winnable and a war in which a lot of good things can come out of it. That's James K. Polk. So let's watch what happens. James K. Polk says, war with Mexico. Henry Clay's talking about a war with Mexico like it'd be a bad thing. I mean, I kind of think that might be great because Mexico is a beatable opponent, and Mexico has a lot of territory that they aren't doing that much with, and I think we could do more with it, like maybe the whole northern half of Mexico. And Southern Democrats were like, you go, James K. Polk. Why? Because they're thinking that could be future territory south of that Missouri Compromise line that we could develop into more slaveholding states, right? I mean, I don't know if we could grow cotton there, but that could be slaveholding territory, so let's go. And Whigs and Henry Clay are like, why are we starting a war? We don't need to start a war. But they're also kind of muted in their opposition because they recognize it's not a great look to be cheering against the United States in a war, especially a war that we're likely to win. Now, as this war got a little more complicated, there was a lot of people saying, I told you guys, why are we getting into this war? But it's like, look, I want to be clear. The Mexican War, as we call it here, that starts in 1846, the Mexican War is totally a war that the United States chose to start. James K. Polk comes in, he's like, yes, we're choosing to start it because we could get good stuff out of it. And we did. I'm going to skip past all the stuff that happened in the war. I'll say one interesting thing that happens in the war is certain guys like Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant, who become noteworthy later, kind of cut their teeth in the experience of combat. They experience combat. They will become part of the officer corps of the United States Army, in a decade. But for now, they're just sort of like, learning the skills of war. But yeah, it takes 2 years. It's a little more complicated than maybe Polk had hoped. It turns into a bit more of a slowdown. But in the end, Polk gets what he wants, which is a Mexican government that's been defeated and is at a treaty table, and Polk can drive a hard bargain. And here's what they get. Here's what the United States gets in the bargain. We get the northern half of we get the northern half of Mexico. We get all of this territory here on this map, right? Which includes all of California and Nevada and Utah and Arizona and New Mexico, and a little chunk of Colorado. This is not an insignificant. I mean, I'm soft selling it. This is an enormous part of the United States. All right, it's an enormous chunk of our economy today. All right, lots of places that are really lovely and sort of fully American in our understanding today came out as a result of this Mexican War. And Polk says, there you go. You're welcome, America. I just got you all that. And now I'm going to say peace out and like not run for office again. And it seems like manifest destiny has been achieved, has been accomplished or unlocked. We just went from sea to shining sea, right? It's spectacular. It's amazing. And however, as we're going to see, the process of kind of digesting all this territory, the process of like incorporating this into our country is going to really inflame the slavery debate, and it will destabilize the country. It is what's going to sort of lead to the meltdowns coming into the next decade that lead to the Civil War. So it's not like, it's not like this is not without consequence or negative consequence. There's significant negative consequences. Polk, thing is, Polk retires, or he leaves office. Polk leaves office. He dies just a couple months later, and as he, laid his head down on his deathbed, he's like, I did it, and the country will thank me later. And I suppose today maybe we do, but I'd say for the next 15 years or so, or 20 years, there's going to be a lot of heartache and heartburn over that question. Okay, so that's our lesson today. Thank you guys so much. Good work on this. We will explore this more when we're all back together, but until then, have a great day. God bless you.